We're in the book of John and Genesis this morning. The two passages interact because the Bible is a book, and because the Bible is a book, we do ourselves a disservice when we don't view it that way. And so it's a great book, and we're going to open in an Old Testament story that has everything to do with Jesus' story in John chapter 1, but I want to familiarize ourselves with the story. It's about a man named Jacob, and Jacob was a mess. Jacob's own name means deceiver, trickster. He is a conniver. That's who Jacob is, and Jacob has come from a family who's a mess. He's come from a dysfunctional family where mom and dad are working against each other. And the point in time we pick up the story, Jacob has just worked with his mom to trick his dad about receiving this blessing that God had already promised. And by the way, even in the story of Jacob and we'll see in our stories, you see this reality of when we buy into the evil one's promise in each of our lives, that we have to by certain rules of engagement, that we have to do something on our own that will allow us to attain and get what we want, instead of relying on the promises of God. The wages of that is always death. The wages of that is always destruction. And so that's what Jacob and his mom Rebekah did. They deceived their father so Jacob would get the blessing, and God had already promised since they were born that Jacob was going to get the blessing. But of course, God needs help. And so since God needs help, we're going to do all of these things. And the minute we don't trust the promises of God and give and lend him our hand, total chaos and destruction begins. And we see that here in this life of Jacob. So as we read this story, he's on the run. And it's a mess because Esau, his brother, didn't get the blessing. Esau's trying to figure out what he needs to do, the laws he needs to live by. And so even prior to this, Esau, because he had married people from these Hittite tribes and the Philistine tribes, and neither we're happy with that. And Jacob's figuring that's why. And so he's distraught. He's very angry at his brother Jacob, and he's going, brother. I mean, it's just, everything's a mess. I mean, so a brother's wanting to kill his brother. And Esau's trying to save himself. He's going to kill Jacob because he wants the blessing. That's one way to get the blessing. And Jacob is now on the run because they don't want him to marry these wives that Esau did, so they're sending Jacob away, but it's really a plan to keep him away from Esau's brother who's going to kill him. And then Esau thinks, okay, I've screwed up, and I've married a couple of wives from these Hittite tribes. I need to try to correct that, and so I'm going to marry someone from my dad's side of the family, and maybe that'll make mom and dad happy. It's a mess. It looks like our families, doesn't it? Just want to please mom and dad. Oh, they don't like me. Well, what do they like? Well, then I'm going to do this. Jacob's on the path, and his trickery and his deceivery is going to take him, and he'll never see his mom and dad again. Because the wages of sin is always destructiveness. And Jacob, he is being a deceiver, and he is on the run. And this is where we meet up with Jacob. Jacob is on the run here in Genesis 28. I'm going to start with that. Jacob left Beersheba and went to Haran. He came to a certain place and camped for a night since the sun had set. He took one of the stones there, set it under his head, and lay down to sleep. And he dreamed, no matter where we're running, God always runs faster. He always runs faster. He beats us to where we're going. Just ask Jonah. Tries to run away from Nineveh, and God beats him there. God always will beat us to wherever we're running. Jacob has a dream. A stairway was set on the ground, and it reached all the way to the sky. Angels of God were going up and going down on it. Then God was right before him, saying, I'm God. I'm the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. I'm giving the ground on which you're sleeping to you and your descendants. even though you're fleeing from it right now. Your descendants will be as the dust of the earth. They'll stretch from the west to the east and from the north to the south. All the families of the earth will bless themselves in you and your descendants. Yes, I'll stay with you, you scoundrel, wherever you go. I will protect you, conniver. I will protect you, the deceiver, everywhere you go, and I will bring the deceiver and the conniver back to this ground. I'll stick with you. I will stick with you, scoundrel, till everything I've promised is done. And Jacob woke up from his sleep, and he says, God is in this place. Truly, he's in this place. And I didn't even know it. And he was terrified. He whispered in awe, this is incredible. It's wonderful. Holy, this place where I'm sleeping, it's God's house. This is the gate of heaven. Centuries later, Jesus is calling his disciples, and that's where we're going to pick up the story here today in John chapter 1, verses 43 to 51. The next day, Jesus decided to go to Galilee. He found Philip and said to him, "Follow me." And Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. And Philip found Nathanael and said to him, "We found him of whom Moses and the law and the prophets spoke, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." Nathanael said to him, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" And Philip said to him, "Well, come and see." Jesus saw Nathanael coming toward him and said, "Behold, an Israelite, in whom there is no trickery, no deceit, no conniving." Nathanael said to him, "Well, how do you know me?" And Jesus said to him, "Before Philip called you, when you were under the fig tree, I saw you." Nathanael answered him, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel." And Jesus answered him, "Because I said to you, I saw you under the fig tree, you believe? You haven't seen nothing yet. You will see greater things than these." And then he said to Nathanael, "Truly, truly, I say to you, you will see heaven opened and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man." The Bible is a beautiful, beautiful book. And we're going to talk about how those two stories intertwine in a glorious, glorious way. Because the whole Bible is about who? Jesus. So when Jacob fell asleep, what do you think that was all about? Of Philip and Nathanael, and we're going to go there and really just kind of go through this looking at the characters in the story, because in a lot of ways they're no different. They're waiting for a Messiah to come, and we see that in the text. They're a mess. Nathanael's certainly a mess in this passage. Philip comes to him, so Jesus is starting to call his followers to come to him, and so Philip has been called by Jesus, and one of the things that seems to naturally happen when you have been and have met Jesus is you want other people to meet him too. And so Philip naturally just, Nathanael, we found the one. We found the one to whom Moses and the law and the prophets are talking about, and you can put up the John 1 passage, at least the first part of it, on the screen. We found that one. And John 1 has always said that the law came, already said in the first part of chapter 1, the law came, but grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. And so following up on that, Philip following up, and John really following up on that, uses this language that Philip comes to Nathanael and says, "You know what? We found the one. We found the hero. We found the one that the stories of old have told us about." You know, so much of what we even read in Scripture, it reminds me it is not so many times, so that if email me after this about what I'm about to say. I'm just going to go blah, blah, blah and delete it, okay? But the gospel reminds us in a very way of a fairy tale. Tales, right? We love fairy tales. We love the reality. We love the idea that the frog really could be a prince. We love the idea that the ugly duckling could be not just in the fairy tales, it's in our stories. You know, the one, and there's always some sort of hero that comes along and engages and makes that happen. And so even in stories like Lord of the Rings, you know, who would have known that this scruffy traveler, you know, named Strider was the king of Gondor? It's what fairy tales are made of. There's this longing in fairy tales that things that are broken, things that are ugly, things that are not right. Fairy tales. Because somewhere in the back of our mind, in the back of reality, we know enough and we live enough that we actually think it happens. When it does happen, when the duckling becomes the premier duck and the frog becomes the prince, that's a fairy tale. Nathaniel and Philip and all of them have been longing for hope against hope. And Philip comes to Nathaniel and says, "It's true, it's true. I've met the one that Moses and the law prophets talk about. This isn't a fairy tale, it's true. All of your longings, all of your hope for things that aren't right. I have found the one, or he has found me." Who we've lost. A lot like Nathaniel fairy tales, because Nathaniel immediately, you can go to the next, tells him he found him, and what does Nathaniel do? Nathaniel's pretty harsh in this, right. I found Jesus of Nazareth. Well, last time I checked the list of who's who and the successful list, and I don't see anyone from Nazareth on that. No, that nothing good comes from that place. Philip insists and says, "Well, come and see." So Nathaniel, skeptic that he is, comes and sees. And then Jesus immediately says to him, by the way, Jesus immediately said, because obviously Nathaniel was pretty harsh in his first statement, Jesus doesn't scold Nathaniel. Doesn't tell him he's wrong. Well, I'm from Nazareth. Jesus doesn't go into defense mode. Didn't you read your Bible? Didn't you read your Old Testament? Jesus is extremely gracious to Nathaniel's skewed view of people and places, and doesn't even address it. In fact, it's almost like Jesus compliments Nathaniel. He says, "Look, an Israelite in whom there is no deceit." Now, Jesus is setting the tone for everything here, because literally, almost what you can read here is, look, an Israelite who's not Jacob. Here's this Israelite who's not Jacob, in whom is no deceit. Now, I don't know what Jesus meant, but he's almost complimenting Nathaniel, like, Nathaniel has no deceit. Well, you know what? Nathaniel actually really doesn't have much deceit in him, because you know what? Nathaniel kind of tells it like he feels it, right? He just said, can anything good come from Nazareth? He could have sugarcoated that. He could have done a lot of things. And Jesus says, look, here's an honest guy. Shares what's on his heart. Nathanael's still not too impressed because he's never met Jesus. So what does Nathanael say? You don't know me. You know nothing about me. Now, I don't care if this is a compliment or not. He's still kind of challenging Jesus. He's kind of saying, you don't know me. So shut up. And then Jesus says to him, before Philip called you, and literally long before Philip called you, I saw you under the fig tree. Now, that was enough for Nathanael to make a Messiah. I always wonder what Nathanael was or wasn't doing under the fig tree. What did Jesus know about Nathanael? Kind of reminds me, a few chapters later, the woman at the well is going to show up to Jesus, and he's going to ask her a question, and she's going to say, well, I don't have any husbands. He goes, you're right, because you've had 5 husbands. And then when she runs back to her village people, she's excited, which is what happens, and it's kind of the same thing that happens to Nathanael. She's excited. So here's this woman of ill repute that Jesus meets at the well. Jesus knows her, and guess what she shares? I mean, can you imagine her going back down into downtown Homosassa? We all know who this woman is. We know why she's out there by herself. We know why she doesn't have any friends. We know all of that. And here's what she says when she comes running to us. Look, you need to come and meet someone. He told me everything I ever did. And we're going, oh my word. He did what? And you're excited that he's known everything you've ever done? Nathanael's excited when Jesus knows him. It doesn't scare him. He immediately breaks into a confession of Jesus. Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the one that Moses was talking about. And then Jesus comes back at him. It's quite this dialogue going on, so now Jesus seems a little flabbergasted at Nathanael. You believe because I said I saw you under the fig tree? You've seen nothing yet. I will do greater things than these. I love the dialogue between Nathanael and Jesus. But this is really not a story about Nathanael. It's a story about Jesus. To the extent that Nathanael's in the passage, I think we are Nathanael. We're the skeptics. We are the ones who sometimes struggle to believe. But Jesus is so gracious in his comment to Nathanael. But at the same time, he's giving Nathanael life. See, in every human heart, in my human heart and in your human heart, and you can go all the way back to Jacob. Jacob wakes up from his dream, and you know what excites him the most? Is that God was there. That there's actually a gateway to heaven, and I experienced it. There's this path to heaven. There's this longing in all of our hearts where, because we are created in the image of God, we've been given his image, we have a longing to know who God is. We actually have this longing to meet God and to be one with God and to know God. And that's like the quest of every human being. And, to a certain extent, it's the quest. I don't believe it's not to a certain extent. It's the quest of every human religion that's ever been out there. Is this idea is, how do I know God? How do I please God? How do I get to God? All of these things are always going on. Jacob meets, and in that longing that Jacob meets, he meets this God and says, truly this God whom my heart longs for, who I'm actually running from, he's met me and he's in this place. And really, when Nathanael realizes, when Jesus says, I saw you under the fig tree, he has to say, truly, this is the one. This is God himself. This is the one who's the King of Israel. This is the one who Moses talked about. And Jesus says, well, you know what? You're going to see greater things. You just knew maybe because I was a prophet. You knew, and you're saying these things about me. But there's something greater, and there's something more special, and he actually reveals this to Nathanael immediately. Because when he says, truly, truly, right after he says, you will see greater things than this, what is the greater thing that he's going to see? The greater thing he's going to see is, truly, truly, I say to you, Nathanael, you will see heaven open and the angels of God ascending and descending upon me, the Son of Man. Nathanael, this is greater. You're impressed because I knew that you sat under the fig tree. But let me tell you something about myself. All of that longing, you're excited because now this promised one has come. He calls him the King of Israel, and maybe Nathanael has his sights over on an overthrow of Rome. I don't know quite what he does. But Jesus says the greater thing is this. I know you're a studier of the Old Testament. I know you know the story that we just read in Genesis. Nathanael, you're standing in the presence of the ladder to heaven. I'm the ladder. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the living, breathing, walking Bethel. I'm the house of God. I'm the temple. I'm very God himself. I'm the place where God and humanity meet. That's what humanity longs for. You see, every religion, save Christianity, longs in a way for the same thing that Christianity longs for. They long for God and humanity to meet. Every other religion says it's up to you to make it happen. And Jesus says, I'm the one who makes it happen. You know, growing up, and I don't mean to, I guess I do mean to, because because it destroys the gospel. So I know I'm probably stepping on someone's favorite nostalgic church service that they maybe were in growing up. But there is no more song that could ever be anti-gospel than the old hymn, We Are Climbing Jacob's Ladder. That's Antichrist. We're not climbing Jacob's ladder. That's not what that event with Jacob was about. It's not what Jesus is saying. What Jacob saw and what Jesus then in the book of John is, I am the ladder. If we are climbing Jacob's ladder, there's no hope, and go home, please. Just go home. Because you'll never make it, ever. Go home. There's no hope in that song. Jesus is Jacob's ladder, and we don't climb it. There is a ladder in the vision, but Jesus climbs it all the way down to the dung heap. And you know why he came to the dung heap of this world? Because it's where you and I are. He's the ladder. He's Bethel. He's the one. It's why we proclaim Jesus plus nothing is everything. He says, and you can put the last verse up there again, truly, truly, I'll say to this, you will see the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man. He came down and he's bringing us up. He's come down. Heaven came down and glory. There's a good heaven came down and glory filled our souls. Oh, what a wonderful, oh, what a wonder that is. See, I'm an equal opportunity player with the old hymns. Truly I say to you, Nathaniel, it's me or nothing. I am the one. As I close, I want to talk about Philip for a second. Nathaniel is the skeptic. I think Nathaniel, this idea that you can't be a skeptic or that you can't have doubts, Jesus does not trash Nathaniel because he doubts or he has questions or it doesn't make any sense to him. He's gentle with skeptics. Philip has obviously met Christ and is engaged him. And I want to... He says something very interesting. You can go back to the slide where Philip introduces. So Philip introduces or says, you know what, I've met the one. And Nathaniel is immediately skeptical. And now you have Philip. And Philip actually becomes so unlike us because to answer the skeptic... This is how we were taught. At least I was, maybe, taught to bear witness. So Nathaniel is skeptic. What does Philip say to Nathaniel? You don't believe in this Jesus and this Holy One? Well, let me tell you what he's done in my life. Let me tell you what he's done in my heart. Let me tell you what he's done in my soul. I used to do this and I don't do this anymore. And I used to do this and I don't do this anymore. And then you can believe because look at me, Philip. Look at me, Nathaniel. You knew me before. And how we bear with Jesus. He says you died. Go and see him. Don't look at me. Don't look at my life. Don't look at my story. Meet Jesus. Come and see. You doubt. You accept it. You're doubting. Then let me just bring you to Jesus. Let me engage him. See, so many times, see the problem as we believe that. And you know what? You know what happens is we meet the skeptic. We meet the one who doesn't know Christ, and they are skeptical. We begin to describe to them all the ways we are climbing Jacob's ladder and how we're a good soldier of the cross. Come and see Jesus. Nathaniel, I'm not the advertisement for Jesus. I am his ambassador. I am the one who's going to link you up in connection with him, but I am not. He's what your heart is looking for. You know, sometimes I think we so buy into this. We do this with church, right? You know, you're excited about, I'm not saying this because I love this church, but if I'm going to pick on someone, we just pick on ourselves here. We don't pick on other people, okay? You're excited about Nature Coast Church. You want people to come, but somewhere along the line, even the way we do church. You know, think about if you're inviting someone to Nature Coast Church. How do you do it? Man, we got some great kids programs. We've got a new high school group that's going on, and kids are being loved. We have a great community. We have a great community that loved Linda Lockwood well for 5.5 years. And we do, by the way. We have all of those things. We may even have the community that your heart is longing for. And you know what? That's a good thing, too. It's a very that Nature Coast does that, and I hope when we are doing our children's programs, I hope that they are the best that we possibly can do, and I hope they get better, and I hope we do them better. You may come because they have a great praise team. You may come because, well, you got to come hear our pastor. Church is the place where people come and meet Jesus, not community. Those are all part of those things. But is the church the place we find our therapeutic community that we need? It can be. I don't want to dismiss that. But if that's what it is, you'll be broken because we're broken here. And if you are looking for me or the church to be your therapeutic need, we will fail you. We won't be there when you need us. We won't love you like we ought. But when we come to meet Jesus, then we can take what we do well, and we can take our failures, and we can all meet him together. You see, even if we do our churches with the best programs or the best songs or the best preaching, and I'll pick on myself, if my goal, this is going to go into my last couple of weeks' sermons, if my goal, and I do pour myself into this, and I pour myself into my sermons, and I do all of those things, so I'm not saying this isn't a cop-out, but if that is my goal, that people will come to Nature Coast Church because they hear a good sermon and they engage the sermon well, and they have a pastor who engages them well, and they love the pastor. If that becomes what is holding people here, then it is my law that becomes tyrannical. Guess what that means is next week I got to do it again. And then the next week I got to do it again. And the next week, and the next week, and the next week, and it's exhausting. Because I'm good as the next one, and then I'm only as good as the next one. When the next thing comes along, and then the next church is doing it, well, I got to do it better, and it becomes a law. The wages of those laws are always death. The wages of needing to be and have a good sermon will lead your pastor right to death. But the gift of God, his promises, his ascending and descending, his living, it is the gift of life that sets you and I free to not be bound. And if my sermons have ever gotten better, it's because I didn't care anymore. And somehow, Jesus shows up. It can be flat out exhausting to try to be the best church on the Nature Coast. And I want to do things well. But our calling is not to be the best church on the Nature Coast. Our calling is to proclaim Jesus plus nothing is everything. And you know what, even as I was thinking this week, if proclaiming Jesus plus nothing is everything, then I equate that with, well, you know why we're the best church on the Nature Coast? Because we proclaim everything. That's slavery then. And a law to make sure next week. You see, we always take God's good gifts and we turn them into power and our need to control. We turn this beautiful love story, fairy tale story that's a true fairy tale of love, into one of power. You know what? We're always on the run too, because I've been somewhat generic. On the run from Jesus. We're always on the run, and we're never running toward heaven. We're always running toward ourselves. We're always running under the tyranny of the law, and we're always working for something. We always have wages. And you know what our wages are in the church? You know what? My calling is to be the greatest father. My calling is to be the greatest husband. My calling is to be the greatest pastor. In the blank. Journey to me. I become enslaved. Was I good enough dad this week? Was I good enough husband this week? Was I good enough anything? If my wages and what I am seeking to earn is the good dad of the year of the Lord, those wages will leave. Because I'll be exhausted. But the gift of God is life, His promises. You may be here this morning and say, you know what, I want the gospel to be. Human heart wants a story like, everyone wants to be loved. We want a story like the gospel to be true, that God loves us in spite of who we are and what we've done, and He's going to redeem us and give us every blessing that we could ever imagine. I mean, who that's really good news. I mean, who wouldn't want that? But we turn it into a law. We do. You may be here this morning and say, you know what, I would love to do that. I don't really believe that. I'm skeptical of that. I'm skeptical of all of these things. And, you know, one of the reasons I'm skeptical is because, you know what, it may be all fine and good for you, but you know what, you do not know what I have done. You don't know where I've been. You don't even know what I did yesterday. You didn't even know what I've done 20 years ago in my life. You may not, all that stuff's just unforgivable. I can't forgive myself. I can't do all of those things. And Jesus says, you know what, I saw you. I know. And I still love you. You see, even in the church, we don't want to believe that because we consider that a fairy tale. That God loves you and me more and above, beyond what we have ever done. That we could never out-sin God's grace. I feel it when I say that, because people will say, what? You can't say that. That would be crazy. What kind of God would do something like that? Not the God I serve, because you are not the God of love. We don't trust that. And so every time you speak about grace, and it's like you're a grace preacher and all you do is speak fairy tales. Listen, if that fairy tale is not true, we're toast. We have no hope. We trade the love story. Even the disciples did it. You know, they meet him, and you know, by the end, they're arguing about who's going to sit next to Jesus at his right. I mean, they've turned the, you know, what have I earned? Have I earned wages to sit by your right hand and left hand? And Jesus just shakes his head. Jesus says to Nathanael, you know what? I've already seen your wages under the fig tree. And I'm still going to turn a frog into a prince. That's what the gospel does. It takes the ugly ducklings and the frogs and turns them into kings and queens. Jacob was on the run. He was the Are you on the run this morning? I guarantee every one of us is on the run is because we're living by some law that's kicking our butt. And we've either given up or we're trying harder. And instead of running to Jesus, if we think we can do it on our own, we don't run to Jesus. We run to the law. We see what it says, and we just try and try and try and try. And we either end up in despair because we know we can never do it, or we believe we've attained it, and then we become incorrigible to other people who aren't doing it. Or we just give up. Jesus says, and I say, come and see Jesus. He is the ladder. He's the gateway. He's God himself. Saw the one whom you and I can run to. Come and see. Come and see. Jesus plus nothing is everything.